ahead and record. I'm going to dig in, and I want to leave plenty of time for questions and clarifications as we work through that. So today we're going to be talking about a tool that Echo Consulting uses pretty extensively, which is called a CRAID Log. A little bit about us: we blend people, process, and technology to drive transformations. So really our focus is increase transparency, improve accountability, and remove friction. So we're focusing on solutions that fit organizations. So for today, we're going to have an open webinar. So what that means is you are welcome to unmute and ask questions. We are going to be sharing these slides out after the fact. We also include the recording of this webinar. So you are welcome to take notes. You're welcome to take screenshots, obviously, but we will send this recording. We will send the slides out afterwards as long as we have your email address. I believe most of you we do because you've signed up for this webinar. And again, if you don't feel comfortable unmuting and asking a question when I'm talking, I'll try to breathe a couple of times so you guys have a chance to ask questions. But you can also chat. We've got a couple of members of Echo here, so you can go ahead and chat the question and someone will be monitoring and can reach out and ask the question. Any questions about rules of engagement for today's webinar? Oftentimes we get people joining in a little bit later, so I'm going to keep going and we'll go from there. So before I jump into the tool and the solution and the way Echo oftentimes uses it, I want to talk about some of the common challenges that we're looking to address. So ineffective communication, unrealistic schedules, scope creep, budget overrun, lack of accountability. If you've been in the space of either project management or even operational management, right, there's a lot of struggle when things are changing. There's a lot of struggle when you're prioritizing different tasks and different work. What our goal today is to talk about tools and tips and ways to manage risks proactively instead of constantly being what we call fighting fires and being in a reactionary mode. Oftentimes as individuals and team members, we feel overwhelmed because we're getting things from lots of different directions and different requests from different people. And so how do we manage all of this in one place? How do we manage so that our teams and our coworkers have visibility and have a place that they can reference to understand where everything is, right? So again, ineffective communication, and that communication isn't necessarily like you might have a good conversation again as we move hybrid, as people are working remotely. Something that used to be a conversation in the break room or between meetings, walking from one place to another, now oftentimes has to occur either via a chat or via a virtual meeting where you don't necessarily have that between meetings time. It comes up, and where does it live? So some of those challenges are what we're going to be talking about today. Any other common challenges anyone wants to kind of call out before we dig into tools to address? All right. So I do want to clarify a couple of terms before we dig too much further. So I didn't mention too much in the beginning, but Echo Consulting focuses on project management solutions. And so we are strong believers in project management that fits, that it's a toolbox that everyone should have access to high quality, effective project management. And so towards that end, we do want to clarify the difference and some of the similarities between what we call change management and project management. So change management is similar to project management in that it's a disciplined approach, it's a structured process, it's a set of tools, but change management is focusing on leading the people side of change, still looking to achieve a desired outcome. And so you may be familiar with the project management definition. This comes from PMI, but it's a pretty, typical, which is project management. It's a framework, a knowledge, skills, tools, and techniques to help meet the project goal, right? It's usually time bound. We're trying to execute on this goal in this amount of time. The change management side of it is managing the people side of change. So the quote that I actually like for the definition, and I'll call it out here, is I call it as project management is getting the solution. And the solution isn't always the software. I just want to be clear. The solution can be people, process, technology, a combination. It could be automation, it can be scaling, it can be a lot of different things, right? So project management is getting the solution ready for the organization, right? So it's identifying those requirements, it's making sure that those requirements and goals are met for the organization. Change management is getting the organization ready for the solution. And these roles overlap in a lot of ways, as I'm sure you know, right? When you're working on a project, what oftentimes can occur is that you get to the end and you are in, for example, testing, or some new users are coming into the solution and they have new requirements. They weren't included early enough. Maybe the training that you had planned isn't significant enough, or maybe you've gone live and there causes interruption and people aren't adopting it and things are in multiple places. It can be difficult when you're cutting over from one solution, whether that's people, process, technology, right, to another solution. So ideally, you have this marriage between the project management, right, mobilizing the resources to get the solution ready for the organization, and the change management, getting the organization ready for the solution. And when project and management and change management work well together, that's where you maximize the return on investment. That's where you really get that adoption and the buy-in, and you can take that solution and use it as a foundation and continue to build and grow on it, right? So today we're going to be talking again mostly about risk management and a CRAID log, which is one of the tools Echo Consulting uses both internally as well as with our clients to help facilitate both project management and change management. And so we're going to be talking a little bit more about that, but I do want to make sure that we're clear. Project management, right? Getting the solution ready, change management, getting the organization ready for the solution. If you have one and not the other, you have a significant issue. If you have project management, if you have a solution that's ready for the organization, but the organization is not trained, they're not ready to adopt, they're not cutting over, you've spent all of this work on getting that solution ready and you don't get the value because people aren't using it. If you've trained people up, you've gotten people really excited, and then the solution that's being built is not high quality, it is not complete, and it's rolled out too soon, you've got a major issue in your hands in terms of you're going to be firefighting that. And in addition to that, you're going to lose that traction that change management was working on to getting that organization ready if the solution itself is not adding value, is not exciting, is not going to, it's not going to help them. It's going to cause them additional work. Any questions? I spent a little bit extra time here, but any questions about project management versus change management? Okay, so now for the actual topic of today's webinar, which is more about risk management. So risk management, and I actually believe as a project manager that risk management is the most important aspect of my role, right? So it's the practice of identifying, evaluating, preventing, and mitigating risks that may impact the outcome of a project. So in my humble opinion, as a project manager, oftentimes project management as a discipline spends too much time on the initial plan and the initial checklist of things that need to get done and in what order, and not enough time in the actual managing risks and understanding that change is part of a project. Also, as a project manager, spending so much time, and I think about myself as a cheerleader and pushing and we can do this and let's go. But not taking enough time to make sure that there is space for all of the stakeholders in the project to call out their risks. Sometimes when we're trying to motivate teams, mobilize resources to get moving, and I'm a classic culprit of this because I talk a lot and I talk fast and I move quickly, but like, do we have the time to really evaluate and think what could go wrong here and spend the correct amount of time addressing those? Not just people that are, concerned about change and uncomfortable, but like really understanding, a lot of projects have resources and team members that have been on previous projects. Maybe they've had a bad experience, or maybe they've had a really good experience and they can share some tips or things that worked really well. Sometimes as a project manager, I'm coming into a team that maybe I don't know as well. I don't know all the stakeholders, and some people are quieter and other people are really loud. And how do I make sure that everyone is able to bring those risks forward, have space for that, see it articulated somewhere, and then dig into how to address these? And that's really what we're trying to do with this CRAID log and the process behind it, okay? So again, risk management is the practice of identifying, evaluating, preventing, or mitigating risks. I want to call out a couple of words here: preventing and mitigating. So I talked about earlier is the importance of proactive versus reactive. When we're talking about, oftentimes we're busy, we have priorities and ideas and everything coming from all different directions. How do we make space to actually have time to think ahead, to plan ahead, and to be able to be proactive and say, hey, this could happen. What should we do about it if it does? Right? Instead of only looking at it. And so I have a whole nother webinar. Melissa can send it out or send the link, which is about risk management, risk mitigation, and prioritization, and lots of other things. But I do want to just make sure that for today, it's that how do we get to the point where we can be proactive instead of always fighting fires and being reactive. Okay. So, all right, so we're going to get to the meat of this. So RAID is a more common terminology as a tool in the tool belt of a project manager or a change manager or a product manager, right? And RAID stands for risk, action, issue, and decision. And so as we talk about the CRAID log, we'll find out what the C means, right? But we'll talk a little bit about what I call more formal or traditional project management, and maybe some of the tools that you've addressed in the past, and some have worked for you and some maybe haven't. So risk, action, issues, and decisions. And I have a quick echo tip here, which is at Echo, we actually use the RAID instead of meeting notes. And people oftentimes are, when we bring this into a client, they're like, no, like meeting notes, like we need meeting notes, and what happened? Well, I would just push back a little bit. And if you have a great solution for meeting notes, great. But a lot of people have meeting notes in a million different places because there's different stakeholders, and they have meeting notes and they're kind of just there. But what's the point of a meeting? Like, why are we all meeting together, right? It's really to either have the decision about something, right? Or to identify and assign action items that we couldn't do that outside of a meeting. Or it's to be brainstorming and identifying risks and issues that are happening and addressing them and coming up with mitigation plans, right? So I just want to push back a little bit. When you're talking about meetings that are like pure information, again, when we're giving information, what is that information? It's typically the outcome of a decision or potentially the outcome of an action. So again, doesn't work for everyone, but just as a quick tip, we actually use an ongoing RAID log instead of meeting notes. And when we start the meeting, we look at all of the open items that we have that are critical, that are due, that are decisions that we need to make. All right, it helps us keep our meetings actionable. So if you come from a more formal project management training background, you're probably familiar with the concept of a risk register and an issue log. So a risk register, meaning you're trying to capture the risks over the course of the project, and the goal is obviously to address those risks and come up with plans and rate those risks before they have a negative impact on a project, right? The issue log is where you're recording any issues. So the first thing that I found, again, as a more traditionally trained project manager, is that I ended up in the situation where I had a risk register and an issue log, and then I moved things from a risk register over to an issue log when it became available. My team didn't always necessarily know whether to put something on the risk register or the issue log, and they really didn't necessarily understand what the difference was between a risk and an issue. And oftentimes it came down to like priority or impact instead of what a risk was, which is this possibility of happening, versus an issue, which is in the process of happening. Okay. I will just, oh, did I go the wrong one first? Okay, well, we'll do this first. So so far we've been talking about RAID, right? Risks and issues, what a risk log is, what an issue log is, or risk register. But when we presented this meeting, we said CRAID. Well, this actually, I have to give credit to one of our brilliant clients. They did not have a change management system in place. We were working on implementing it for them. But in the short term, they were like, well, we don't have good change management. We're just going to add changes to our RAID log. And we've been doing that for a while, but we hadn't added it to the abbreviation. So that's where the CRAID log was born. It's RAID, but you're adding changes. So change requests, change orders, etc. This is something that you and your team as an organization needs to determine whether this makes sense. Some organizations have a very well thought out change process that already exists. You do not want, under any circumstances, to have two what I call sources of record. So if you have a change management process that is well adopted in your organization, do not use a CRAID. Use RAID. Keep the changes over there. But what we have found is that something that's a decision oftentimes turns into a change, or something that's an issue oftentimes feeds into a change. So for organizations or teams that don't have a very formal change management process, it's really a great place to start for tracking changes. And we'll talk a little bit about change management process and then how you can kind of break it up later on. So anyone have a question? So RAID is the typical one. It's a pretty standard industry known term. It's a project management and change management tool. CRAID is a flavor of that where we add change management to that, especially for teams that don't have a change management process already adopted, or maybe they only do change management process for budgetary changes, but they need a place for scope changes, schedule changes, resource changes, other things like that. Okay. So what is a change request? Change order, there's a lot of aliases for change, right? But it's a request for an adjustment of the scope or schedule or budget of the deliverable. Oftentimes change requests or change orders for organizations do tend to be budget facing in general. So it's like people don't really go through the formal process of change unless there's a budget component. Obviously, best practices is that you're tracking not just budget changes, but if there's a scope change, schedule change, if there's a new team or a change of a vendor or something like that, that could impact the project. So again, change request. And so if you were thinking about this in terms of a typical project management solution, you'd have an issue log, you would have a risk register, and you would have a change log or change register that may be specific for a project, or it may be across. Let me go here first. So what I'm trying to say is that you have change requests in one place, you have an issue log in one place, you have an action item log, you might have a risk register and meeting notes. And think about from a project team standpoint, well, I have this thing and I don't know where to put it. Am I putting it on the issue log? Maybe that's too much. Am I putting it in the action item log or meeting notes, but nothing gets done off the meeting notes because like it's just a past information. Change order, well, maybe it doesn't make sense to do the change order process because it's not a big change to budget, but I still need to log the change because this could impact something. So the goal of the CRAID log, right, is to get rid of everything else and have a single place where your team feels confident and empowered to actually log the items that they want to have visibility, right? Too often as a project manager, I'm the only one that actually updates anything, and I have to get it out of people in meetings, and people are frustrated being in meetings or me stand up with them, but like, where do I capture all of this information? Too often a project plan is something that only the project manager is supposed to update. Like, don't touch the project manager's project plan because it'll break everything and or they won't know where it is. The CRAID log was Echo's response to how to provide a single place where the team feels comfortable entering information into and capturing this information and really addressing what we believe to be a critical cornerstone of project management, which is risk management, proactive risk management, and really planning the mitigation strategies of how we can address it, because we know that risks are going to happen. We know that changes are going to happen. We know that issues are going to happen, and we need a way to manage it We also need a historical record of, hey, we've known as a team about this risk for 2 months, right? And we had a plan and this was available. Or, hey, this issue has come up and we are escalating it to this person and this person is now going to own it. And hey, here's the history of this risk and where it was and you could have accessed it. So it's about not only capturing this information directly from your team, but it's also about transparency and visibility for the organization so that if you needed to, you can look and see where that generated, who put it in, when it was there, what the notes are, if there's been planning associated with that risk. So again, one of the things that we talk about with risk management and with our teams, and again, giving them a tool, a single tool, one tool to rule them all, that one ring to rule them all, one tool to rule them all, is making sure that they feel comfortable about what the different types of items are that are on the list. But because you have a single place instead of 5 different places they could put the information, it's as easy as updating the type in the CRAID log. If someone puts it as an issue and it's really a risk, you can just say, oh, we're moving that, we're going to label that as a risk instead. Or, oh, hey, you marked that as a decision. Now that's going to be a change. It's as easy as doing that. And so we'll actually get into the log. I'll show you how to create your own. But for one more moment, let's just make sure that we have the right definitions. You'll have this available to you as a tool set if you want to bring this back to your team. So a risk. A risk is an event that may happen and that could have an impact on the project success. I want to be clear about this. A risk could happen and not have an impact on the project success because you're already past that, right? A risk could also happen and okay, this is very important. So good hint. So each risk should be given an owner who is responsible for monitoring the risk and implementing the plan to resolve, right? We always want to have a single owner for a risk. But again, the project manager, the change manager's role is going to be to make sure that there is space for the team to look at this risk, to analyze this risk, and to think about mitigation strategies for this risk. Okay. I think that's what I wanted to say here. So important note, didn't understand this at first when I was a baby PM. So a risk could be positive or negative. So we typically think of risks that are negative. Something is going to have a negative impact on the project success. So the project is going to go over budget. The project is going to be behind schedule. The project, something like that. But there is a positive risk. There are positive risks as well. So for example, there could be a positive risk associated with like a new team member that already has experience in the software. There could be a positive risk that we're going live with another project and that gave us extra resources that we didn't have before for something. So there's different opportunities, but we want to make sure that we're capturing all of the risks, all of the things that could impact the project. And then what we do is we process of rating the risks about the impact that they'll have to the project and the probability and the likelihood. So we'll get into that in a moment. But just to be clear, we want to capture all of the risks, not just the bad ones. But those are the ones that people typically focus on. As a reminder for an action, so these are items that need to be complete. They have a specific end goal, and it's through the duration of a project, and it should have a clearly assigned owner. So one of the pieces we get is about, okay, well, how is an action different than a task? So when I think about a task, right, it's typically something that has, a dependency, something that is within the implementation plan of a project. With a specific goal in mind, right? Actions might be following up with someone on this or making sure that you have a review of a document. So sometimes an action and a task can overlap, but typically when we're talking about actions, we're talking about something that either came out of a meeting, someone that maybe isn't in the project, so they're not checking the project plan or in the weekly meetings. It's either something that's like a quick checkbox or a follow-up person for someone that's not necessarily included in the day-to-day management of the tasks. They might not be a doer, they might just be someone that's consulted on the project or informed about the project. And then issue, so an event that has occurred currently or is currently occurring and it could have an impact on the project success. And then risk versus issues, so potential versus actually happened. The ideal scenario is that you don't have a risk, you don't have an issue that wasn't previously a risk. So like ideally something was a risk, it has a mitigation plan, it becomes an issue, the risk actually comes true and it happens, you update it to be an issue and then you execute on the plan that you had. Obviously, occasionally we have issues pop up. Definitely if we're not proactive, if we're constantly in the firefighting mode and we're constantly in reactionary, we're only dealing with issues, right? Because we don't have time to think about the things that could potentially happen because all we're doing is focusing on the things that are currently happening to us. And our ability to be strategic and our ability to be proactive is greatly reduced. So quick echo tip here, and I think we have another resource on this, Melissa. I think I've done one on this, but we do a tool that's called a pre-mortem exercise. I think a lot of people have heard of postmortems or lessons learned or retrospectives. One of the things that we love to do with our team is what's called a pre-mortem exercise. Oftentimes we do this after an initial work breakdown structure, after we have this initial project plan, an initial kickoff. We actually do this exercise where we ask each person in the team to tell us the top 3 reasons that the project is going to fail. So instead of just saying all the reasons that the project is going to work and we just spent all this time on the work breakdown structure and the tasks and who's it's going to be assigned to and how we're going to implement on this, we actually take a moment and we say, tell me all the reasons this project is going to fail. And typically we do this exercise in a blind way so that people have to put their own information down. And this is a fantastic, powerful, powerful tool because you are directing everyone on the team's energy towards identifying risks, issues that they've run into on previous projects. This is actually one of the most useful ways to pull information from previous lessons learned that are directly applicable and that have people on the team that have had experienced this in other projects. Like, why is this going to fail? It also opens up the team. It's a good team building exercise because they'll realize that, oh, 5 people on the team all think that it's going to fail for the same reason. As a team, we can problem solve. We can be proactive and think about how can we address this risk before it becomes an issue. And this is how I originally populate much of my CRAID log so that people start coming there and they feel bought in because their risks that they have identified are on that CRAID log. It's also where I typically do my action items, both prerequisites and action items coming out of the kickoff. So like they immediately have something assigned to them, whether it's getting access to something or something like that. But this is a huge opportunity for us as project managers, as change managers, to get it out in the open, not just ask people to raise their hand and say, oh, hey, I think that this is a risk, but instead put everyone's communal energy towards these are the risks. This is how we're going to overcome them. I'm taking a breath. Does anyone want to add something or ask a question here before I keep going? All right, we'll keep going. All right, so the last one is the decision. So decisions need to be made over the course of a project and log of the concrete choices that are made along the way. So this is really important. And one of the main challenges that we talked about early on is about accountability. And I actually have a project going on right now. That team is not in attendance, but anyways, accountability and visibility that there's a decision that requires the sponsor's attention or a resource manager's attention or a budget owner's attention or someone's attention. A decision log can be really valuable too if you don't have a great change management process for requirements or for the changing goal of a project or something like that. You can log critical decisions and who made them and at what point they made them, and then point back to it and be like, okay, we made this decision. We had this assumption. We made this decision at this point. We are now changing this decision down the road. Maybe there's different people that are in the room. Maybe there's a new requirement that came up that we weren't aware of when we made the decision originally. But it is important to have that history that we made a decision. We went along this way. we figured something out and now we're going to change and move something else. So a decision and a change oftentimes can go back and forth, but this is a really great tool for articulating things that need executive level buy-in or leadership intervention, right? I can mark a decision of my sponsor saying, hey, this is the information. Now, as a project manager and as a team, I'm sure you've heard, like, don't bring problems to your person, bring solutions. I'm not saying put a decision without context and without a recommendation. That's not the point of the decision log. That's just kind of like washing your hands of it and not doing the best you can do. But it is important to articulate it, put it in writing, and have someone be able to make that decision. And also a place to actually document like what your recommendations are, what your options are, who knows about this and things like that. So it gives you a good opportunity to be a little bit more disciplined in your approach when you're asking. Again, I have another resource on this. I'm just kind of shouting them out as I go, Melissa, but like, what is the priority is like a classic example where you're asking your sponsor because they've asked for 5 things in the last week, being like, okay, well, what's the priority? That's not enough information, right? Like, we need to provide more information, being like, okay, this is going to impact this project. Like, we recommend this approach, or we need a decision about whether we're going to focus on this or that, but you can't have both because of this, this, and this, right? So a decision log is not a place to just put something off and say, oh, hey, it's the sponsor's responsibility. It's this other person's responsibility to decide. It still requires management. It still requires options and recommendations, etc. Okay. All right. So, okay, so now we get to the fun stuff. This is what I like. If you know me at all, you know I'm not like a huge fan of slides, but we did need to kind of get the main concepts down. So now we're actually going to get in and build a CRAID log. So Echo Consulting does a lot in the implementation of PMOs, PPMs, change management, annual planning, strategic planning, all that other good stuff, right? So we use a variety of different tools. And typically we use a CRAID log when we're managing our client relationships. And we also kind of demonstrate how we do that in best practices with it. So we have examples of CRAID logs that we use with clients in Smartsheet and Monday. We've created one today for you guys in Google Sheets, and then I'll probably do one in Excel too, but Google Sheets and Excel basically the same. You can do this in Asana, you can do this in Trello, Planner, this can be done anywhere, but we're just gonna, typically it gets done in some sort of grid format, and then you can kind of go to a board format from there, so I won't spend too much time. Before I dig into a specific example, there's one big piece that constantly comes up with clients, which is this CRAID, what's a CRAID item versus a task in a project plan? And I mentioned this briefly when I was saying like action item versus task. So I can give some guidance and some examples of like a task versus a CRAID item, but it's important to understand that these are decisions, like governance decisions, that each organization and each team needs to make based on how they interact with the CRAID log. Again, when I said in the beginning, whether you use a RAID log or a CRAID log, that's really a decision internally. Do you have a change management process that's well adopted? Maybe you have a change management process only for bigger budget decisions that need other people's support, but you don't have a change management process within your operational team or within your project team, and that's why you use the CRAID item. And then we'll talk about that in a second. So I'm going to jump out of here for a moment, and I'm going to go into a copy of a CRAID log. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you guys. One second. Are you guys still able to see my screen okay? You're seeing a copy of a CRAID log? Okay. I'm assuming if someone's not interrupting me that I'm going to get to keep going. Okay, so the first thing that I mentioned is that rather than having 5 different places like an issue log, a risk register, a decision log, a change order log, or a change request log, and then actions, and then meeting notes, and lots of other data sources, right? We like to have it all in one. And what we do is we do a categorization of the information based on what we call the CRAID type. So action, change, decision, issue, risk. You'll already see that our team uses additional component, which is a backlog item. Now, we use this for something where we're talking to a client and something might be out of scope, or something, it might be something that we could get to if there's enough time. but the concept of this is that we have a single place that people can enter information into. So I'm going to focus primarily on the grid format first, but I will show you a couple of tips and tricks because a lot of your task management software, if you have it, has some additional functionality that can be really useful. So CRAID type, then we have some sort of description. So this can just be an open text field. It can be the name if you prefer it, right? Then the most important things to make this actionable and to have accountability and transparency and all these other things is assigned to. You absolutely need assigned to, but not only do you need assigned to, you need to make sure that you are assigning it to a single individual. Do not assign it to an entire team. Do not assign it to 2 people. Assign it to 1 person. If you ever really need to have another person be able to see it and filter it down, you need to add another column. You can make it a contact. Yeah, that's fine. Don't worry too much about this. And then you can call these, for example, you can call this additional assigned to, or additional resources, or additional team members, right? So I'm not getting into RASCII right now, but this is also the same concept. So there is only a single owner, but you could have additional people in here, like if you needed to call them out, but always make sure that you have a single owner here, okay? I'm gonna hide that for right now. So the other piece is having a due date. With the CRAID log, typically the start date isn't as important. Usually we try to capture the date that it was entered into the log, but what you're really looking for is when is it due? When it starts to becoming a multiple step process, that's where you're probably a hint that it's not really belonging in a CRAID log, and instead it belongs in a task. It belongs in a task list, a project plan, etc. Right? So it's like, oh, we need this to happen, and then this to happen, and then this to happen. That's probably something that needs to be in a project plan if you are talking about a project. If you're operational and it's not really a project plan, then potentially you still do it in a CRAID log. But again, it's really critical that we have a due date for everything. As a project manager, that's the first thing I'm looking for. What is the due date? How do I get this person to commit, to buy in that they are responsible for this date? Me as a project manager, me as a change manager, as product manager, a resource manager, HR manager, putting in a date here means nothing, next to nothing, unless you get the buy-in and agreement of the assigned to person. So try as hard as you can to not just put a random date in here, and instead to talk to Lisa and say, Lisa, when can you commit to getting the stakeholder list done? If I just put in Lisa and 9-9, even if I've notified her, even if I've told her, she's not bought into getting that done. Again, maybe you have this magical unicorn community and culture in your organization where one person can assign it to the other person and just magically everyone agrees that this is going to get done on this date. But oftentimes, if we add dates without the agreement, without people understanding, they're not bought in, they feel overwhelmed, and then they're going to push it off to someone else. So be careful. It's really critical. Don't leave a due date blank. Don't leave the assigned to blank. Your job is to make sure that there is an assigned to and there is a due date. Okay. Now, I go into organizations all the time. I actually have a client right now, Caroline will know, where there are lots of people and lots of tasks that do not have assigned to and do not have due dates. So if I have 20 items that do not have assigned tos and do not have due dates, right, then the next step I have is actually not to go individual, but to actually start thinking about the priority, right? So the priority. So one way to do priority is just to think critical, high, medium, low, and then ideally you are defining what critical means. Hello? Sorry. Okay. Usually you need to define what critical, high, medium, low is. Now, it is fantastic if your organization already has definitions of what critical, high, medium, low are, right? But if your organization does not have standardized understanding of what critical, high, medium, and low are, it is your responsibility as the project manager, as the change manager, as the operational team manager to define what critical, high, and medium, low mean, okay? Now, so if I don't have an assigned to and I don't have a due date and I don't know what these are, then the next step I would have is to prioritize. Now, these are action items and I'm just kind of going through and I know the information. Another way to do this though, especially for risks, is called a rating. And the rating, one of the most typical ways to do that is to think about the impact versus the probability. So remember how we've been talking about, like, for risks that we want to catch them before they're actually issues, before they're actually happening? There's two different components that we're talking about. First is how big of an impact is this risk going to happen if this, like, if it actually occurs? So, for example, you have wildfires and you are working in you're working in California right now, and you have a oh, Cheryl, can you go on mute maybe? Sorry. So you might have the impact, right? Which is, if you lose power, your team loses power, they're displaced by wildfires, they're whatever that is, like, the impact of the project is catastrophic because everyone can't work for those 2 weeks or something like that, right? Well, if you're in California and you're in the area that's having that, the probability is pretty high. If you're in Vermont, where I am, that's pretty low, right? So again, you wouldn't necessarily put everything on here, but if this was a risk for you, you would indicate what the impact was to the project, which is extremely high, and the probability, which may be high, low, medium, etc. And I typically do a numeric way of doing this. So I just do like a 1 through 5. In this case, they've chosen to do like low, medium, and high, and do it that way. And then what happens is it basically multiplies the impact towards the probability, and then gives you a ranking, and you can use that to help prioritize. So again, this prioritization is a classic critical, high, medium, low. Make sure you have a definition in the kickoff meeting with your project. Make sure that you're establishing what this means when you're using it. Have the definitions up here. So this is Smartsheet, but you can add a column description where you say, critical, high, medium, and then you agree, like, which is critical means blocked, immediate impact to scope, schedule, budget, right? And again, that's just my definition. You might have a different definition, but you can actually, put the definitions here, okay? So in addition to priority, right? So again, I use priority to mark the most important things. The other piece is status. So classic status is open versus on hold or blocked, not started, closed. Sometimes people use new, some people use canceled. So you can have a variety of different statuses. Oftentimes you want to reference something else, whether it's a URL to a document or something like that. Really critical, what are the next steps? What are the mitigation plan? What should be happening next? We use an escalated concept so that we can roll up, okay, only these specific CRAID items need to show up for our meeting with our senior leader or our sponsor. We don't need to go through every single action item. We only need to go through certain ones. And then we have some other information just that we capture. So when was it created? When did it become an issue? When did it get put on hold, and things like that? So whether you use this here, or let me just go to the one in Google just so I can prove to you that it doesn't require a task management system to do it. 1 second. How can I do this? Okay, so I just want to show you this. So I was showing you an example in a task management system, Smartsheet, that we like to implement, but this is the same concept. You can do this in Excel, you can do this in Smartsheet, in Google Sheets, you can do this in a variety of different ways. I've seen people do this in PowerPoint in a table, so whatever works for you. But the concept is, ideally you'd have some sort of number associated with it so that you could reference a specific number. The issue with this is that oftentimes you add something up here. If you don't have an automated numbering standpoint, it doesn't always work. But here again, you have the different types: change request, risk, action, issue, decisions, the description, the owner, whether you use assigned to, owner, etc. You always need to have an assigned to. When it's due, what the status is. Again, a little bit different statuses here, but same kind of concept. The prioritization, next steps, and then some additional impact, right? So here they have impact and probability, and these are 1 through 5, whereas the other one we looked at was 1 through 3. Date, issue, became a risk, and things like that. You can always add additional columns. So if you already have a change management process or something like that, you could, for example, insert a column and say change order number, right? Or let's say you're not really using projects and you want to instead do, Okay, so let's say you already have a change order number because you have a different change order process. Maybe it's associated instead of a project with a team, so you could have team and you can do a drop down, right, of like what team it is. So again, different ways of doing this, but adding information and then being able to. So why am I adding the information in a grid? So I'm going to go back to my Smartsheet just so I'm most familiar here, but whether you use Google Sheets or Excel. So the reason that I'm doing this, right, is so that I can do something called filtering, right? So one of the ways I could filter is I could say, I want to only look at risks, for example. And so I can create a filter, which is risks, and I'm only looking at the risk information, okay? So in this case, I don't have a risk, so I'm just going to add one here, like risk, example risk, and assign to Lisa. I'm going to pick on Lisa, and the due date is, let's say, the 15th, okay? And Lisa, do you agree with the 15th? Just so we make sure I don't just put a date. Okay, so that's one way to do it. Another thing that I might choose to do, so this is a risk, so I'm going to unfilter. Now you can see that we already had that. So like we had a filter that was risks and issues. We had a filter that was like past due, for example. We didn't have any past due items, good on us. So these are just some of the filters that we might use. The other piece that I personally like to do, which is conditional formatting, and I think Charlie just did a video on this, but I like to do conditional formatting that says if something is like past due, then maybe it's red. Maybe I would gray things out that are closed. Maybe I would bold things that are escalated, for example. But one of the things I like to do, because what am I saying? I'm saying you should always have assigned to, you should always have a due date, right? So I might do a conditional format that says make it pink if it doesn't have an assigned to. Okay. I might also sort things and say I'm going to sort by priority. So if I had something that was critical and something that was high and medium, right? And then I choose to sort by priority, and then now critical, high, medium, low is there. You'll notice that we use 1 dash, 2 dash, because this is not, in this case, critical, high, and medium, right, are actually in alphabetical order, so you can get around it. But oftentimes you'll have options that are not in alphabetical order, and so you want to make sure that you're giving the number so that you can correctly sort them when you're using these systems. Okay. Let me go back to my slide deck and then I'll make sure we open up for questions. So statuses, okay, so let me just share my screen really here. So in addition to, so we talked today about risks, action items, issues, decisions, the possibility of adding changes to a CRAID log. Just a couple of alternatives that people use. So some people use assumptions, especially for like longer term projects and earlier on, right? So assumptions, things that your team is going to assume is going to happen a certain way, or assumptions that you were under that need to get validated down the road. Also, another way to use this is especially if you're doing kind of like a more programmatic way, is dependencies. So the A can be assumptions, the D can sometimes be dependencies instead of decisions. So these are just different ways that people use that acronym tool, RAID. Okay. All right, so we're going to send this out. So we did give you a free template that is Google Sheets, so you'll have access to this if you're interested. And before I go into questions, so this is Echo. So I'm the founder of Echo Consulting, and I'm a solution architect here. Our belief is that everyone should have access to project management solutions that fit, so that you can grow more, struggle less, deal with less frustration. So we offer PMO, PPM solution implementations, business process automation, strategic, and now coming into annual planning season, prioritization of work. We do a lot in the software implementation, SaaS implementation space, and then we also do training and mentorship. So not only do we do these free webinars, which we love to give back because we believe everyone should have access to this, but we also do trainings that are specifically targeted to organizations that are going through, trying to enhance their current project management or change management practices, or looking to have a little bit more disciplined approach. These are some of the partners that we have implemented with. So we are a Smartsheet partner. We have a lot of traction Monday.com partner. We are not a Microsoft partner, but we implement Microsoft Teams and a lot of the Microsoft Office solutions, as well as ClickUp. And we're also honestly have familiarity with a lot of other task management, work management tools as well. It's not the tool, it's the process and the people and all that good stuff. So before I open it up for questions, if you enjoyed this webinar, we do have best practices for leading impactful meetings, which was a amazing webinar the last time we did it, and we had great attendance and some great tips and tools for making meetings effective, especially as we're all moving to that. I guess we're already moved, but a lot of virtual meetings and how to make those, and especially some of those more interactive components for those longer meetings. If you want to get in touch with us, you can certainly reach out. So support@echoconsultingpm.com. Our website information is here. You can contact us via our website. You're also welcome to schedule a meeting if you have specific questions. That's it for me. We are going to go ahead and send out a email follow-up to this. It's going to include the link to this recording. It's going to include the link to this deck that I shared today. And it's also going to include a survey specifically asking about how this webinar was, how it could be more effective for you. We give webinars at least monthly at this point, free webinars. So any feedback you can give us on how to make this more effective and topics that you're interested in will be greatly appreciated, because we want to keep on doing this and reach the most people possible. And with that, I have 8 minutes remaining. Does anyone have any questions, clarifications, ideas they want to share? Feel free to chat them or go off mute and reach out. Quiet bunch. All right. Well, if no one has anything they want to share, that's fine. I appreciated your time today. Again, my name is Molly Yanis, and I'm the founder of Echo Consulting. We're a project management solutions company, and we honestly believe in building self-sufficiency, not dependency. So one of the components of that are these webinars and sharing our knowledge, because we believe that everyone is a project manager in our lives, and we just want to make these tools more effective and available to people, and not have people intimidated by project management or think that it has to hide behind a certification or 20 years of experience. These are things that we all have access to, and it's really about solving problems and being effective and sharing our knowledge. So if you're interested, feel free to check out our website, echoprojectmanagement.com. We look forward to hearing from you, and we hope that you'll sign up for future webinars if you found this useful. We also have a YouTube channel you can subscribe to for seeing some of our new videos, and this video will go there later today. And with that, I'm going to drop off. Thanks all.